phone,
Yeah,
right?
on the phone, it was like
Right,
fuzzy, and
yeah,
it's like, I don't
yeah.
like this. So I started to change in the middle. What I should have done is just gotten out of the phone before I,
See, I
and I had them
find,
both going at the same time, and it's
I find on the
screwy.
phone, a lot of the stuff that you can get on the computer, the buttons and whatever.
Yeah, it's
Right,
not
they're
there.
not
They're
there.
on the phone.
They're not there.
Right.
you
That's
know.
probably why I couldn't get off the, on
Right,
the phone. I was
exactly.
like, how do I
That-
get out of it?
Right, that's what I kept saying.
I'm
Push leave, push
And
leave.
it didn't show up.
Right, exactly, that happens all
So
the time.
again, sorry for yet last night, sorry for this
Wow.
morning.
We'll
So
forgive
since
you.
we're
All is
apologizing,
forgiven.
I'll just say to the online community, those who are watching at a later time, we've got a later start today. I'm gonna blame it on the weather. It's a rainy, cold day, and we're moving slow, getting underway, but now we're ready. I think we're ready to pick up our reading. For those of you who haven't tuned in before, if you're just finding this site, this is a Bible reading and discussion group. Sometimes we'll call it Bible study, but that means different things in different communities. We are an open community. We invite everybody to bring their mind into the environment to think along with what we believe and what we are faith-seeking understanding, as Anselm said. So our conversations will travel far and wide, usually finding our way back to the text and seeking to understand the text in its context. Seeking to understand. And I'm Pastor Lou, pastor here at the High Mountain Presbyterian Church, and these are my in-person students who gather to provide the color for our conversation. You know, they're color commentators, you know.
That's
So-
a good way to put it.
So that's what we're about today. Now, who remembers where we last read?
Eight.
Okay, I was turned right to it.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
I want to say something as we read, whoever's going to read. I found this one thing in the notes, and I thought it would add. We have been chatting a lot back and forth between the two studies about this idea of how does God relate to human beings, especially nations, and how are consequences of shoving aside God's hopes for the world, how do they play out in the world? And it says here in the commentary that between 8:16 and 9:7, which I think we're going to read, that one of the things that is going on is that Isaiah is expressing, and get this, his frustration as he decides to wait for the Lord to act. Okay? Isaiah maintains that the Lord is hiding from the nation. It's a disturbing proposition that is meant to overcome suggestions of divine impotence or maliciousness. You see how that's right down the alley of what we've been talking about? Like, is God not doing anything, or is God doing something and doing it maliciously? So Isaiah has this idea that God is hiding from the nations, and it comes out in what we're going to read today. And it's there to overcome suggestions of divine impotence, or God can't fix it, or maliciousness in the face of crisis, but nevertheless points to the Lord as an important cause in Judah's suffering. Okay? So,
Blame it on God.
that's right. That God is one way or another, either actively or passively involved in seeing to it that Judah, now that's the southern kingdom, which included Jerusalem, that Judah is suffering. Some of this are oracles that appear to be telling the future. Some of it, the commentators believe, are oracles that are written looking back and offering to explain why the devastation happened. And so we'll try to sort through that. I have to confess again, I'm just going to tell you, one of the things I like as a way of reading the Bible is to keep the order of things. What came first, what came next. I'm just as confused as I could possibly be in this text. I don't know what's first, what's next. I went back and got my biblical timelines out to sort of be able to put the macro picture in place that Isaiah is around 600 BCE. And we read Nehemiah and Ezra, Ezra and Nehemiah is actually around 400. So if you can imagine that when you go backwards to go forward,
Yeah, I've got it
Yeah.
400 to 168 BC,
that's Ezra and Nehemiah?
as Nehemiah,
Yeah.
anyway. And it says it's practically undocumented for the Hasmonean or Maccabean line. So,
So,
unless we have, if we didn't have this, I guess we wouldn't have much history at all on.
yeah, and I noticed I looked back to try to see in my charts, where do they put Ezra and Nehemiah? They put Ezra and Nehemiah into what they call, what do they call it? Writings, some kind of writings, but they're not prophets.
Yeah, whatever that word is.
Deuteronomistic, right. They're just, these are writings that exist in between. I also found, I've used this before, that there are tells in a text that date it. And so if I can do this, so the sequence of things is, you have the invasion of the Assyrians, and the Assyrian nation is to the north of both Judah and Israel. So the Assyrian Empire, they invade. There's a whole big long history of who's with them and who's not. Anyway, the nation collapses, the northern kingdom first, and then eventually the southern kingdom. And then come the Babylonians, just as the Babylonians come from the south and from the west, or from the east, and they move in and they deport everybody and tear down the city and destroy it. And then comes the Persians, which we've heard about. And then after the Persians come the Greeks. And the Greeks is the segue into the Romans. Okay, so if you can just see that bigger timeline of what happens in this geographic area. We're heading towards the foundation of the Roman Empire, but prior to that comes the Greek Empire. Okay, so the Greeks, and here's what happens. In Isaiah, which is purported to be written during the Assyrian threat, right? So all the way back to the beginning of the sequence. There are words that are only used by Greeks. And there are words that are only used by Romans, of all things. So there are words that exist in the text for languages and people that didn't even exist yet. And they're here in Isaiah, which is maybe explaining why, much to the consternation of biblical literalists who want to believe that this text was handed to us in its form, it was unedited, that it was God's word to us, which I'm good, go ahead. I'd like to hear God speak directly. That'd be all right with me. But that, in fact, that idea doesn't hold up here in this Isaiah text. And there are 4 distinct parts of Isaiah, and I'll try to mark them out as we get to them. But in the 4 distinct parts, they mark them as distinct, not because we don't believe that Isaiah could tell the future. That's what the biblical literists think. They think that we don't believe that Isaiah could predict the future. And maybe they don't. The linguistic translators don't start with the idea that Isaiah could predict the future. They start with the idea that if Isaiah's narrative is describing an event that happened, it probably was written during the time when that event was happening. And that is a great sore spot, a great thorn in the side and the mind of biblical literalists, because they want to say that prophets are fortune tellers, and that when the prophet was writing about a child who will be born, whatever, that in the prophet's mind, he saw Jesus 400 years in the future. Well, I think they're Christians. They're committed their whole lives to reading and interpreting the Bible, but they don't start with that assumption, especially if they find a word from the Roman lexicon in the text that is supposed to be written in the year 600 BCE.
And then
So-
you have all the translations too, because if you're talking
They do.
about.
There's a
Greek.
variety, that's right, there's a variety of texts.
Yeah.
And there are places where you'll find, they use this language, there are segments of what we hold together as Isaiah that are circulating on their own. You'll find them in the archaeology. You find the segments of Isaiah, like 1 to 8, by itself. And so they argue from that. Science can always be wrong, you just need a new hypothesis. But they argue from that these pericopes, as they call them, these fragments that are found by themselves, were actually standalone documents that later generations then combined together. And it especially makes Isaiah look really, really profound, because Isaiah seems to be able to predict the future. And okay, if you want to adopt a more naive sense of reading, and I don't mean that as an insult, I mean that on purpose. You just say, I'm not getting involved in any of that. I'm going to take the face value of it for what it says. So if in Isaiah chapter 8, it says that this is going to happen in the future, and then later on, you read that it's happening, you just say, wow, isn't God amazing? And God, is able to do that. I come from the school, I subscribe to it, that the word prophet, the word oracle, oracles are not fortune tellers. Oracles are time tellers. They are tellers about the present time. Now, sometimes they will say, if you keep living the way you're living, there's a lot of oracles today about earth environment and survival. There's a lot of, like, what's it, Greta, what's her name?
Tyson.
Yeah.
Thunberg.
Yeah,
Thunberg,
Thornburg,
yeah.
right. Greta Thornburg is an oracle.
Right.
She's an oracle. And does she predict the future?
No.
Is the future she talks about scripted? No.
Right.
But she can with confidence say, look, I'm looking at the signs here, I look in the ocean, I look in the air, I look in the, in the soil, I look in the forests, and I see signs of what is to come. That is the best understanding of what a prophet was and what an oracle was worth. And you'll hear the oracle often say, those that have ears, let them hear and respond. And that's what I hear Greta Thunberg doing all over the world. She's like, I'm the canary in the cage. I'm just trying to tell you. The way things are going, it's not good. But she does not do what theologians and communities of faith do, and to say, she doesn't tell us what God is doing or what God is going to do in response to any of this. She's very much
Yeah.
a child of the earth and
Yeah.
says, look, this is what happens.
We
throw-
have enough people telling us what God is doing.
You think?
I think so. Because you can, it's the whole range of everything, to the left, to the right, and in between. Everybody's speaking for God.
Yeah, God seems to not have a real
Set
clear
to-
idea of what God wants to do. Right?
Which is
Well-
very confusing.
Well, I don't know. I have a friend who said, God's allowing the human race to destroy the earth. Now, okay. I don't have much peace and comfort in that, but,
Well, and that goes back to this, this theological position of going, well, God's just hiding.
Yeah.
God's hiding, and God's just
Yeah.
gonna wait
that's
for
true.
you all to just kill each other and
Yeah.
work it out, and then
Exactly.
God will start over. My father, some things come back, they racing back about my dad. He existed in a very conservative, legalistic tradition. But sometimes his thoughts were like bizarre. And I remember him teaching about Genesis, that he said that if you listen carefully to Genesis, you'll find that Genesis doesn't tell you when the world was made or when it began. It says, in the beginning, the earth was, and it was without form, and it was void. Chaos was over all the earth. So my father, along with other sort of out-of-the-box thinkers, say, we have no idea how many other worlds God has had before us. And the chaos that Adam and Eve were drawn up out of was the result of failure of worlds gone by. And for my dad, that was the place where the dinosaurs came in. That the dinosaurs were actually part of the prehistory world that Genesis acknowledges. The earth was there. It doesn't say God took, a scoop of dirt off of Uranus and brought it down and molded it up and set it in. No, it says, in the beginning, what does it say?
Yeah,
In the beginning,
the world was out.
the world was without form and it was void. There was nothing there. And God took it and added structure to it. So then he would often say that he wondered, how many more times God was going to try, to see if we could get it right. And also, what did they do? What could we have learned from them? I don't know.
We're not good at that.
No, because the best theories now are that some great big fireball came, from out of space, knocked the earth off its existing axis, and everybody that depended upon that balance was gone.
Well, not quite everybody.
Yeah.
There were some mammals and other creatures that survived, and we still have a fossil record going back
Oh, yeah.
before and
Yeah.
then after.
Huge.
But, I don't know, I think, it depends on how you look at Genesis, and there are the two narratives,
That's
too.
right.
But I think that one that says it was without form and void goes back to before there were stars and anything.
That's right, it does. It's a whole universe that was
Yeah, not just
existent
us.
yet.
I mean,
Doesn't
we are
it
so
just say earth or
self-centered.
is it say world?
Well, I
And
don't know.
Cosmos.
whether,
It
what-
says, I think it uses the word cosmos, but I don't know
I
what
would
that
think
really.
that probably makes more sense to our scientifically bent minds, but, I don't know.
It says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the earth was a formless void,
Oh, okay.
and darkness covered the face of the deep.
Well, that's probably true. At some point in time,
So
there
there's-
wasn't any life.
Yeah, because, and then, the light is created, it's separated, and then the other one says, thus the heavens and the earth were finished. No. Oh, the second creation story is just the creation of human beings.
Right.
It doesn't go all the way
Doesn't go
back to
back
the creation
Of
of
the
the world.
universe.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
Well, so that goes back before there's,
Yeah, before there's any human life.
I mean, even
or there's
Earth.
heavens?
Heavens comes
Heavens.
first. They
Yeah.
say heavens first.
Heavens and
So
the
there was a
earth.
giant space maybe that,
Yeah, and
needed to
the
be
earth
filled.
was formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters, which is interesting because later on, God creates the waters, it puts the fish in the water.
Yeah.
So the point is, in my father's reading, and I think he was influenced by some teachers himself who were saying, we always limit our thoughts about God and the world to this world.
yeah.
And we make a mistake because even the ancients, I love to call them the ancient fathers and mothers. The ancient fathers and mothers looked around and they went,
There's evidence.
the way it is now is not the way it always was. And God, that's why we talk about God who is in the beginning and now, always, and ever will be, world without end, life going on. God is above and beyond all of that. And then the question still is, well, how does God relate
Right, yeah.
to the world? And the deists, who are talked bad about in all circles of Christians, the deists basically resolved our returning problem about God by saying, you bump up against God when you bump up against gravity, and you bump up against the laws of decay, and all the rules that science, that's God. It's because God has invested God's self in the created order. And then, of course, the deists are roundly accused of saying, then God stepped back to go, let's see how that will go. And then that's where God is now, just waiting to see what we're doing. So to your friend's
He's
comment,
letting us destroy the earth.
that's right. You all want to just rip this all up and destroy it, you just go right ahead. I mean, you might want to just appreciate a little bit of it before it's gone, but,
I don't know whether it's Hinduism or Buddhism, because I'm not well versed in, but I remember the Joseph Campbell series
Yeah.
speaks about the Brahman. And I think that's Hindu terminology, but the world is the Brahman contemplating the world on a lotus flower. And inside that is another Brahman contemplating and it goes on and on without, to infinity.
Right.
So that's another idea, that there's many worlds and we can't contemplate the enormity of it, which kind of appeals to me in a certain sense, because, I don't think our human minds want to make God smaller.
Mhm.
And I don't think it's something, it's hard to talk about God in other than human terms. We're human beings. But I think we miss most of God when we do that.
Yeah, I even as a child, I don't remember ever getting this from somebody else, but I remember when they would teach us, atomic structure of things. I was always amazed at when we went to astronomy class, you saw these orbs and bodies circulating in relationship to each other. And that was on the big scale. And then you went to chemistry class and you saw worlds existing, atoms, nuclear atoms and electrons. Same idea, same things. And then, later on they take you inside the nucleus. And I wondered if this is what I used to think about when I would try to go, let me think of something really crazy in my head is, what if the universe is just an atom in somebody else's universe?
Mm-hmm.
What if, we see, and at that time, I had never seen pictures like I see now of the enormity of the number of solar systems,
Yeah.
to realize how big it is. But that only makes me feel this even more.
Right.
And then I think about the psalmist who writes, to the psalmist and to the ancient people of the book, the largest canvas that you could think about was the ocean. The ocean was then, for them, what we think of as when we could look up into the universe. The stars in the sky were not that far away. They were on an arch. They were actually lights on an arch that covered the earth. So they didn't think of the expansiveness of the universe, but they did see the ocean as the great, unknown, the great world unknown. So you'll have the psalmist will get into a head like what we've been talking about, and they go, who am I that the God of the depths of the ocean and the sea would regard me? Who am I that the God who created the universe would have regard for who I am and for what I love and care about? And so you have this phase of wonder, like the one contemplating life on a lily pad it's always there in terms of the great cosmic scheme, and it's very much here, although it gets reduced to a very human point of view when one nation goes to war against another nation. And we want to call on the strength of the power of God to come and intervene in a way that makes winners and losers.
Yeah. Well, that's where I get hung up.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I don't think God has taken sides with any of us. God is just saying, I thought I told you. Don't kill each other.
Yeah.
Now go from there, folks. See what you can do with that. I don't know. That sounds really,
No, it sounded great, like a rabbi.
I don't know. Well,
No,
that would be a
no,
very great
seriously.
compliment. But
No,
in my simple mind, it's like there's a couple of rules, right? That Jesus said and other prophets have said. Love God and love your neighbor as yourself. Without that, you're on the wrong path. And frankly, I think there's a lot of truth in that. And if you're looking for simplicity, there you go. But then, what happens? Then there's always the folks who say, well, then what happens if somebody attacks you? Can you go, So humans are complicated. And And maybe that's part of what God intended, for us to figure each other out as we go along. And maybe we'll get closer to what our relationship to God should be. If we can figure out how to deal with each other, I don't know.
I think for me, what kept and still becomes even a larger and larger source for my thinking and my theology today was that by some random act of fate, I ended up in a philosophy course called Process Theology. And it was an honors level course, and it was way above my pay grade in terms of thinking. But I went into it, I delved into it, the theology of Alfred North Whitehead, who was a world-recognized scientist. He was also a theologian, and he was a philosopher. And so he began talking right where we are today, but unfortunately, he invented new words because he felt the words we had could not describe what this life with God was like. And so you had to learn a whole new sort of theological, scientific language. The end of it, I keep talking about it. The end result, as I listen to Alfred North Whitehead and process theology, which is big now out there in the theologians' world, is that God is in the process, in it. But the word I love is that God is always luring us. Luring. And as a fisherman, I like the word lure because it attracts us. That God is trying to, is always involved.
God bless
God
you.
is always involved in every relationship and seeking to attract us to move in the direction of love. It doesn't become, an answer if someone is attacking us. We will still do what we do instinctively to survive. We'll still defend ourselves. But even in that process, Christian language, I would use the Spirit of God, is enticing us, inviting us to be in charge more rather than to be a victim, and to take active steps towards a future that God smiles about, or a future that enhances our relationship. And so he has all these words, and as I've said before, what I love about his approach is he thinks that we think too small in terms of the issue of time. And I think I've said this in here before. He believes that we see the past as something that's past and gone and can be written off. He says, if you think about it, the past is very active in influencing you today. It influences what you do.
And we were seeing the light of stars that came to us
From
millions
so
of
many years ago.
So we know time is relative.
Right, and so he has this word description where he tries to describe the present moment. Whoop, that's gone. So I got to talk about the next one.
Right.
So I try to talk about it, but it moves really fast. But he said every dot of time is also a slice of time. And if you think, it's just moving from one to the next. And what actually is in the present moment is the result, not just of the past, most people can think that that's, but that God actually works in our future. And that the future actually reaches back to us to affect what? Are we going to change the world in 1 nanosecond? No. But just a little bit of leaning towards love
We'll push the whole thing.
changes the whole scenario.
It's
It
like
doesn't,
the pebble in the
That's right.
pond. Yeah.
it doesn't remove the heartache, it doesn't remove the evil, it doesn't take evil's power away, not in this moment. But that all of the universe is moving, I'll give you a sample of his language, to an apprehension of the concrescence of time. Okay, so. And in the end, concrescence, right. In the end, all he's trying to say is, and I think never has a philosophy so affected me in how I think about my life, because he really describes what we already know, and you've heard me say some of this. We have a relationship right now with this table. And by the way, every part of this table has a relationship to other parts of the table.
Right.
The legs have a macro, as he calls a macro relationship with the top. But the particles that make up this have a micro and then a mini micro. And he goes, the world is, as you see it, as you move in it, is the result, and I'm going to use the word cooperation. He uses concrescence. It's the result of a phenomenal cooperation of every element, of air and light and earth, and everything is cooperating together. And then again, I hear the words, I read this and I hear it until I start to hear the psalmist. Day and night pours forth speech of God, of the wonder and the magnitude of God. And I think that some of our thought categories that we use that come out of Greek and Roman theology are too small. They are too boxy. That's why you hear me say, I don't like the doctrine of determination and free will. I think they start from an idea that causes a problem that doesn't, and then it solves the problem. It sees life in a certain way, and it says, well, you know, you have choices. I don't disagree with that. But your choices themselves are made up of a whole variety of influences that make you who you are, that help you, the outcome of all of that. So I would rather stay in the more less determined kind of ways, and then think instead, that's why I use words like broken. The relationships that exist in the world, as complex as they are not perfect. And that somehow brokenness has entered this beautiful world. It has.
Well, it's us.
Yeah.
Us.
I like the concept in Islam that everything has, everything in the universe, the created universe, knows its place. The table knows how to be a table. The animals know what their role is. The experiment called humans is not quite so cut and dried, but, you know, we think that inanimate objects don't have, like, they just obey God. God says, this is what you are, this is your role. A tree doesn't suddenly say, I want to be a bush, and become, you know. So this is the thinking that Islamic scholars had from way, way back when we didn't have all the science. And they understood about very small particles, because they understood about birth and what caused, you know, that. So they knew that things were probably made of these very small particles, which we would call atoms today. But that some of them are immutable. They're obeying, they would say, they're obeying God's determination for the chair, for the floor, for, you know. But we are specially chosen by God. I would include at the animal kingdom in this too, to somewhat, but to make ourselves something else, maybe in God's image, something closer to what we imagine God to be, and we are able to do some kind of transformation, whereas the inanimate objects around us cannot. Maybe that was a very simplistic way of trying to explain how the ordered universe became and operates, but that means, though, that every single thing you do, blowing your nose, has an effect on something.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so that makes me feel like, oh my God. How deliberative should I be in my life that I have to think of everything? That's so much harder than to just live your life without thought to what your actions may be doing.
Yeah, that's even harder than trying to determine what your purpose is.
Yeah,
That's really hard.
because we can
It's
change
complex.
what we want to do, and
Yeah.
we have some agency over what we do. So,
So instead of purpose, you're thinking about place. What is my place in this life? What is the, you know, the part that I play? And everything that you described from the Islamic ancients and wisdom had to be influencing this Whiteheadian process, because they didn't start out of nothing. And he was a world scholar. I know he probably knew all about those ideas. And the idea that, you know, all of this is a cooperation, and there are different levels of cooperation. He didn't use the word choice as a human being, but he believed that the molecules of your body, like, you know, if you cut off a piece of your finger, there's information in your DNA that grows that part of your finger back. And that it's that detailed, the level of information. But what blew him and the other scientists away, you know, is that they discovered is that at the heart of the orderliness of the world is randomness. Because they track these minute particles, and they go, well, if all the water, then we know that we saw that atom here, and it's in circulation, and so we're going to see it over here. And it doesn't go there.
Yeah, how do you explain
It's-
that? Well, that's what in Islam they would call fitna, the chaos of the universe as well. So there's order and chaos. And, you know, God balances it somehow, but we can't fully understand it yet. And as humanity advances in making instruments to help us understand what's going on around us, the more we understand, the less we know.
Right.
It gets more and more complicated, not easier to understand. So is that God laughing at us? Like, I don't know. It's also that exploration, like the novel Frankenstein. Do we want to be gods? Do we want to have that kind of power over the universe and life itself? It could go very wrong for us.
Yeah, the science fiction writers have always been good. They're the best prophets, you know, because they're the ones that predict what actually might happen. And then if even 10% of them are right, we look and we go, oh, we could have seen that coming. You know, because the science fiction writers will take what is, what we see and what we know, and they spin the yarns out of what might be. And now, most of science fiction is about AI, artificial intelligence, and the risk we've always sensed that could we build a machine so bright and smart that it could take over us. And we all know the risk is, it may seem far off, it may, like,
It's not
but
that
it's,
far off.
it's there. I run
I
into it.
yell at my phone
I know,
every day.
I run
Yeah,
into
there
it.
you
I
go.
run into it on my computer,
Why are you
like, all
correcting
the
me?
time.
I know what I
Like,
want to say.
I didn't give you permission to do that.
Yes.
You know, what are you doing? And
No, that's how their name is spelled.
It drives you crazy. It's
Yes.
like, you're-
so then the question still remains, the question of the text always is, who is God? And how are we to know God? And what is the role that God plays in the unfolding of our lives? And here you have people that are,
thinking about it.
they're thinking about it, and they're reflecting upon who God is, all the while they're demonstrating who human beings are. They're showing you what human beings are like. And there's I saw an excerpt, I've not watched the show Yellowstone, but there's an excerpt, because that show deals a lot with the clash between European culture and Native American, because it happens on the reservation. And there's this young woman who becomes a professor in the University of Arizona, and they show her in her class, and she's introducing the course she's going to teach about the relationship between European culture and Native American culture. She has a beautiful speech about, she quotes a writing of Christopher Columbus when he arrived in the New World. And he describes the people that he has found. And he says that they know not of weapons to be used against each other. He said, in fact, we handed them a sword, and they took the sword by the blade and cut themselves. And Christopher Columbus says, knowing now what we know about them, we could dominate the entire population with 50 people.
Sure. Of course, they
And they
did
did.
know of weapons, but they didn't have to be European style
No,
weapons.
right.
And they didn't know about diseases that these
No,
folks
they did
were
not.
from, which
And
was the most potent
So
weapon.
she goes on in her summary to say that everyone, both native and the resultant people today, have inherited the belief that the good life is a life where you have the power to make someone do what
What
they
you
do
want.
not want to do. That you have that power. And she says, it's a deeply ingrained experience that comes from a region. They can track it to a region where this need to dominate, this need to control, to take over, especially another human being.
Right.
Yeah, we're gonna make your lives better.
Yes, that's
Sure.
right.
We found you.
Yeah.
The Native Americans always say, "Oh, I didn't know we were lost."
Right.
We're
That's
lost.
right. So, all of that, to me, my mind is on hyperactive drive and all the things that I can listen to now and hear. And I think, yeah, I talk about the brokenness that exists. And then I go back to my favorite story, which tells of this to Eve and Adam, that Eve and Adam were not content to accept the terms of the world the way they were presented to them. They did not like not being able to control their world. And it's not me
They
in the
didn't
year...
want to be the table.
They
wanted
didn't.
to be the
That's
human.
right. And even if they understood that they weren't the table, that they were they were the ones eating at the table, they still weren't. Isn't that what the story tells? They were eating at the table. The trees were producing fruit. The water was flowing. But they didn't like that experience of dependency in the middle of it. And so they communicated to God, this will never work. Not with us. This won't work. And so that strain of throwing off our essential humanity, denying who we are, denying the limits of our knowing. We don't know the future. We barely understand the past. We don't even, in the present, what do you know in the present today? You recognize the surprises are around the corner everywhere. We live without knowing. And yet, if we could figure out how, I keep seeing the picture of the Buddha, sitting in the passive position of acceptance. If we could figure out how to accept our lot in life more. I don't know, would that mean that we would accept, cancer and just say, oh, well, there you have it. I don't think that's what comes from it. There's still an engagement. These people end up engaging in helping to shape their world. And I've been thinking, probably not all night, but since we read in Nehemiah last night, the spirit of, I'm going to have something to do with the rebuilding of Jerusalem. Me, my family, we are going to take shifts. We're going to organize in dividing up the labor and getting to the work. We're not simply just passive pawns of God in the world. We're not.
If you have a project that you think is worth doing, get up and do it. God helps those who help themselves,
Yes.
right? Depends on what the project is,
Yes.
though. Here, I'm thinking they're going to, it's wonderful to have a city that's fortified,
Yeah.
but in the end, is it really such a good thing? It may not be. While those walls keep people out, it also keeps you in.
Yeah.
And that causes a big problem. Who's allowed to come in? We already have seen these same people rejecting some of their nearest neighbors around them.
Yeah, and they're living not just big historical consequences of the Assyrians and the Babylonians. They're living in the mini crises that come too. They rebuild the east walls, and because they've pushed out the Samaritans and they've rejected people for whatever reason, those people go home, get their weapons, they come back, and then they destroy that very section that they've made. I think, I remember my Bible Old Testament professor saying that, the people that write the big movies about civilization, and they tell the story of civilization, that the big crisis which is going on in the unwritten text of the Bible is the struggle between city dwellers and country dwellers.
There's that, yeah.
That the philosophy of what is our best defense are build the walls and build the cities, and then the other survivalists who say, no, once you build walls and put a foundation down, you're screwed, because.
You don't fence me
Right.
in.
You can't get food in, you
Right,
can't.
get mobile, because look at the sieges, like you watch these shows, what is a siege? A siege is where they circle a city, they cut off the water, and they wait till the people starve to death.
Right.
So the country dwellers always said, no, our salvation is not in the God of walls. Our salvation is in the God who's created us to be migratory people. We can move, we can run, they cannot contain us. And some of that is still at work. I talked last night about how the people were still agrarian. They were farmers, and you couldn't farm inside the city walls. So you had to go out to farm, but then when the threat came, you ran inside the city walls, which for many people was their death trap.
Right.
I keep thinking, nah, I'd be the one.
Oh,
They're
sure.
coming, I'm heading off to the woods.
Well.
I'm gonna go climb a tree.
Maybe not so much. And we do it now on a grander scale, because
Uh-huh.
our countries become those fortifications. We don't let certain people in. Now you're stuck in there. What happens when you have a giant famine? If you've been nasty to your neighbors, are they gonna help you by
Yeah.
sending, they can lay siege to you, or, sanction you, or do other things. So it's the same idea on a larger scale. We're still doing it to ourselves.
Yeah, the whole idea of laying siege has changed. Did you see that news story about the people that shot up those power transformers?
Yes. yeah.
You know, and it darkened the whole area of DC where Paige teaches. Their school was closed for 3 days.
Really?
So that's the kind of siege that can happen, and that was just from 2 people shooting rifles. Imagine, like, the vulnerability that we have.
They get organized, folks, we're in trouble.
Oh,
They
my
did it on
gosh.
the West Coast about 15 years ago, 12 years ago, something like that. And, it was near Silicon Valley, so they had some alternative
Right.
methods of getting stuff back up and running, but it still took a long time. Imagine life now without your computers, your phones, electricity. I can't go 5 minutes without my TV. Come on. And I'm not laughing about that. I really do.
I'm with you as well. I mean, I felt it a lot that year we had the Halloween
Sandy.
snowstorm in Sandy.
Oh, yeah.
And we were without power for 3 weeks. And it was good for my woods, because I cleaned up through the woods. We had a fireplace, and I went through and cleaned up all the sticks in the woods.
Yeah. It's only a
Because-
matter of
and-
time before the furniture goes on.
Yeah, that's right. And I kept looking around going, what can we
can
do
I
without? What's gonna burn the best? But it's a very strange, unfamiliar feeling of dependency.
Right.
Absolutely.
And that dependency, we all are happy to say, we don't have to feel it every day. There are people who do, very large populations of people who do. And in that feeling of dependency comes the God question. Where is God? What is God doing? And I keep coming back to this thing of commentators saying that Isaiah introduces the idea that sometimes God hides. It says, you know what? How you gonna like it if you don't feel my presence? I'm just gonna go over here for a while, see what you do. I'm gonna watch you panic. But here's what I want to say positively. Isn't that kind of what we do in relationships? Isn't that, in a way, fair game in relationships?
Here, you hurt my feelings,
Yeah,
so I'm
like-
gonna ignore you now
Yeah.
for a couple of weeks.
You take advantage of me, you take me for granted. Maybe the best solution for you to get
away.
is for me just to not answer the phone when you call.
Step
What
away.
then? I don't know.
Doesn't solve
Can
anything.
your God be that human?
I hope my God's better than humans. I'm just hoping.
Well, sometimes I feel like God isn't better than humans. And they have a description of God that seems more like them than like what God might be. But
That's our limitations. We
Yeah.
can't imagine anything other than ourselves. They can't either. There's a bigger world than just, Judah.
yeah, much bigger, and they're learning it.
What are they doing in China at the same time? What are they talking about? Probably much the same things
Probably the
in
same.
their own terms, but yeah.
Let's read chapter 9 before the time is
Eight.
complete. Oh,
8.
chapter, before the time is completely gone.
Okay. Then the Lord said to me, take a large tablet and write on it common characters belonging to Mahar Shalal Hashbaz, and have it attested for me by reliable witnesses, the priest Uriah and Zechariah, son of Jeberechiah. And I went to the prophetess, and she conceived and bore a son. Then the Lord said to me, name him Mahar Shalal Hashbaz, for before the child knows how to call my father or my mother, the wealth of Damascus and the spoils of Samaria will be carried away by the king of Assyria. The Lord spoke to me again. Because this people has refused the waters of Shiloah that flow gently and melt in fear before Rezin and the son of Remaliah, therefore the Lord is bringing up against it the mighty floodwaters of the river, the king of Assyria and all his glory. It will rise above all its channels and overflow all its banks. It will sweep on into Judah as a flood, and pouring over it will reach up to the neck, and its outspread wings will fill the breadth of your land, O Emmanuel. Band together, you people, and be dismayed. Listen, all you far countries, gird yourselves and be dismayed. Gird yourselves and be dismayed. Take counsel together, but it shall be brought to naught. Speak a word, but it will not stand, for God is with us. For the Lord spoke thus to me, while his hand was strong upon me, and warned me not to walk in the way of this people, saying, do not call conspiracy all that this people calls conspiracy, and do not fear what it fears or be in dread. But the Lord of hosts, him you shall regard as holy. Let him be your fear, and let him be your dread. He will become a sanctuary, a stone one strikes against. For both houses of Israel he will become a rock one stumbles over, a trap and a snare for the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And many among them shall stumble, they shall fall and be broken, they shall be snared and taken. Bind up the testimony, seal the teaching among my disciples. I will wait for the Lord, who is hiding his face from the house of Jacob, and I will hope in him. See, I and the children whom the Lord has given are signs and portents in Israel from the Lord of hosts, who dwells on Mount Zion. Now, if people say to you, consult the ghosts and the familiar spirits that chirp and mutter, should not a people consult their gods, the dead, on behalf of the living, for teaching and for instruction? Surely those who speak like this will have no dawn. They will pass through the land greatly distressed and hungry. When they are hungry, they will be enraged and will curse their king and their gods. They will turn their faces upward, or they will look to the earth, but will only see distress and darkness, the gloom of anguish, and they will be thrust into thick darkness.
Happy days off
Yeah, yeah, okay. Thanks a lot, Isaiah.
Right.
Thanks a lot. But again, you think, well, he's not saying that God is doing this.
No.
He's saying that God has hidden, and God has removed, if you, as you will, whatever the safeguards are that have happened. He uses the image of this river overflowing its banks.
Mhm.
He's really talking about the army of the Assyrians. They're going to fall on them like
Floodwaters.
rain, like water that has no boundaries. And I love it. It's beautiful imagery, terrible and terrifying, you know. They will be up to the neck. You
Yeah.
can picture people in the river up to their neck with no landing to put their feet on. And then what do? What do? They call out to ghosts and spirits as if they never knew God, as if they never knew a God who was with them. So God hiding and the coming doom that is upon them leads them not to, you know, seek the Lord wherever he may be found. No. They turn to these wisps of thoughts. I wanted to,
Get a picture of people looking at tarot cards.
yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
I'll read your fortune.
right, all the voodoo you can meet. But where has this verse been in the past 3-4 years? Verse 11, for the Lord spoke to me while his hand was strong upon me and warned me not to walk in the ways of this people, saying, now you get this? Do not call conspiracy all that this people call conspiracy. Wow. If we could just have that as the rule of our lives in the culture of America,
From your lips.
yeah, if we just would stop calling conspiracy everything that everybody says is
Come out of
conspiracy.
the dark web.
Yeah. Do not fear what the conspiracy theorists feel. And do not be in dread. Okay.
Well, that's good information at any time.
Yeah, it's good, but it's a little late.
Shall you Twitter it now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We are so immersed,
Twitter.
like the river.
Please.
We're immersed in conspiracy. It's too attractive. And I say that not just for those that are on the right, but even on the left.
Yes.
Conspiracy, that the belief that somehow there are powers that are conspiring against us and that we are unaware of, and that, oh my gosh, that awakens a fear in us.
Sometimes that's true.
That's the reason people believe conspiracies.
But most of the time, it's nonsense, and it's a real good excuse for people to do nothing.
Yeah.
Sit back and say, oh, you know, everything's stacked against us, we can't do anything. So,
Oh, yeah, sort of, and then, I'm just thinking about someone I know who, like, through this COVID situation, oh, it will be up to God who lives or dies.
or maybe
know,
if
like
you
an
put
an-
on a mask or get
Like
a
an anti-vaxxer, oh, no, an
vaccine.
any kind of, you know,
Right.
positive energy. God should be able to handle all of this.
Yeah.
That's a big
And-
thing in that I have relatives.
I'm
from
talking
the
about
South
a relative.
Who say, a cousin of Kelda and, you know, my kids, I guess she's my niece.
Oh,
I
you
just
have to-
about her.
You
No.
have to claim it,
She,
Debbie.
she said, amazed that Kelda got up to date with all her vaccines and got the kids vaccinated. She goes, you did that? That's, you know, that's a lot of hooey. God will punish or take whoever God wants and the rest. And I'm thinking, well, you know, okay, I'm going back to Islam again, but there's a saying, you know, you want to protect yourselves, you know, trust in God, but tie your camel.
Right.
You know,
Uh-huh.
make some concrete action to help yourself from the thing that you see is coming at you. What is wrong? And
I think that the slur, I'll call it a slur, the slide out of statements of faith, which are they're profound, you know, the Lord will take care of you. Let God will guard you and guide you. But the slur, the door opened for the conspiracy because there was a belief that the remedy was not really the remedy. That the remedy was actually concocted by, you know, big government. And,
Yep.
and so people who took that thing of, I'm going to put my, as for me and my house, we will put our trust in the Lord, was a turn from the way Americans have lived, where they have trusted the medical association. And they've always had no trouble doing that, except for Christian Scientists and others. But the majority of people, but it was the conspiracy of the harm intended from the government that caught on, that led people to draw a line to say, no, as for me and my house, we'll trust in the Lord. We're not buying into that trap. And that's the unfortunate part. I mean, that's That's where it all falls apart.
Right.
There's that saying, just because you think someone is always watching you and following you, doesn't mean it's not true.
Oh, that's great. Oh my gosh, that is great.
So-
I like that
We
one.
have some reason to believe in that.
Yeah,
So-
In my house,
yeah.
I
And listen,
have no one else to talk to except the,
Alexa?
Alexa.
well, and also, if we're honest, those conspiracies always have a seed, there's always a seed of truth from an experience where we've all been shocked. You find out that the government experimented on people with certain drugs, the Agent Orange things that have
Oh,
happened.
yeah.
And so you can't, in the face of that, I don't, all of a sudden I don't want medical technology in my life. You can't fight that by saying that makes no sense, because
Because it did.
it has, in certain settings, it has made sense. And the spinners of the conspiracies that we're told here now not to worry about, like take the higher microbiology of the world, and they say, well, if it could happen with Agent Orange, or if it could happen with experimentation for Native American women with, the fertility problems, what's to stop them from, even in smaller ways, implanting into, you see this needle going into your arm.
There's a chip in.
Yeah, what's
Yeah,
to stop them
right.
from altering your
man.
DNA, and it's attractive.
Yes.
It's very attractive because it points out again, Genesis says our biggest problem is what we don't know.
This is true.
And the scientists, I'm sure, I have two cousins in North Carolina, and they are microbiologists who've worked in the research for developing these viruses. And they're Christians, they're Lutherans. And I get emails and Facebook from them, they go, what is the matter with Christians in the world today? Like, what has happened? That all of a sudden, the work that we do, that we give our lives for doing research to find protection from these horrible viruses, we're now perceived as, like
Yeah.
Hitler's henchmen.
Well, I justified getting the shots by saying, well, it's one small thing I can do.
Yes.
And not only for myself, but for other people,
Yes.
because they said this, herd immunity is gonna be really important. And my brother said, I doubt your faith more and more.
Mhm.
You have no trust in the Lord.
Meanwhile,
And that's,
I'm
I
going,
can,
I gave you the ability to
Hello?
make this, get it.
goes right back to Lorna's joke.
Silly folks.
I sent that helicopter, I
That's
sent you a
right,
bow.
right.
What
What
more
are
do
you waiting?
Yeah.
And also, it's selective. Like, I just think about, okay, I get it, you don't want to trust technology because it makes you feel vulnerable.
Yeah.
So when they built this building, did you want engineers and architects who knew about the ratio of
Go with
weight,
a hammer.
Yeah.
weight bearing to pressure and to gravity? Did you want people who were trained, who knew how the rules of, I'm pretty
Oh,
sure you
yeah.
didn't want to just walk into a building that was
Oh.
thrown up by some guy over there who was a Christian and said, God will take care of the people that come into that building.
Exactly.
Mm.
If you were going to trust somebody with the virus, would it be Dr. Fauci or would it be Donald Trump?
Yeah.
Oh, hold on. Talking about Dr. Fauci, here's one of the same person argument. You know how terrible Dr. Fauci was during the AIDS epidemic.
Terrible.
He went right back to that, how he said, oh no, I looked all into that Dr. Fauci. He is no good.
Yeah,
Why?
right.
Because he tried to help people who are gay, Bill.
And initially, he wasn't as aware
Yeah.
of what the community was saying, but
Yes.
he got on board.
But he did, but
And
he
he
listened
was-
to them.
He also advanced the medications.
Well, they came
would
back
help
and around,
keep
because
it
then
in
I had to look
advance.
into it.
Yeah, right.
Then I had to, and I said, you do realize, Will, you left me hanging. They came to him. The head, I can't remember the man's name at the time, but he said, yeah, we need him.
Right.
I mean, you left it, just sort of like here, like where they're talking about this, you're gonna whisper and mutter and ask dead people, to do, really, like,
Isn't it beautiful though?
It is.
I mean, really.
And
beautiful.
it's timeless, because it happens now, it happened then. We
On and
are
on and on.
dopey about certain things, about a lot of things.
And it was such a miracle that a vaccine was found so
Amen.
quickly.
Yes.
And it was,
Modern medicine.
right?
And I said, thank God, and I meant that.
Yes,
And I
me
do
too.
think God is at work in my world.
So I can believe that, I do believe that, all the way up until I have a problem.
Right, the first time
Where
that
were
vaccine
you?
was
You're
out,
hiding
I'm
today.
hiding from the human population.
Oh my gosh, please, Lord, show your
Oh, well.
face.
I'm gonna break down all that script about consulting dead people for wisdom.
What, that really was, I really enjoyed that part. I mean, that